Hello, welcome back. My name is Ari and today I've got something a little bit different going on. So when my video for my TBR for July went live, somebody pointed out in the comments that the tiebreaker 10 is actually a low tiebreaker and not a high tiebreaker, like I said in the video. So I should have added a book to my TBR instead of taking one off of my TBR, which means my TBR ended up being 2 books short of what it should have been, because I should have re-rolled that roll and then added another book. So I decided that I would just do this video and add 2 books to my TBR and then do the rolls for them, talk about them in this video, and there you go, making up for it. Now, I was planning to read both of these when I was on vacation last week because this is mid-month by now, and I ended up not reading a single word on vacation. I just took a true vacation from life and lived in the moment, went out, had a lot of nice dinners. I got a tattoo and yeah, no reading at all. So a little bit later in the month, but we'll jump into it. First, I am going to show you both of the rolls and tell you which books I picked for those rolls. Makeup roll number 1 is an 11. Alright, as you just saw, my first roll was 11, which is a book that was picked for me. So for this one, I went and asked the guy who pointed out that I had did the wrong roll, or that I did the wrong tiebreaker on roll number 1, and just asked him, hey, like, you could pick any book in the world and I will read it. And so that's Grimmicus. I've known him since before I made this channel, so it was cool. And he picked a book called Armor by John Stakely. And this is a book, a science fiction book published in 1984. So it's an older sci-fi book. So I went and grabbed it on Kindle and I read it already, but we'll talk about it in a minute. Let's get into the next roll first. Makeup roll number 2 is a 10. Which is a small book or big book. Tiebreaker is a 10, which we know now that the 10 is the lower one, which is a small book. So the next roll was a 10 and then a low tiebreaker. I counted it right this time, I hope. And that was a small book. And for this one, because I plan to read it in Vegas, I picked Trans Wizard Harriet Porber and the Theater of Love, which takes place in Las Vegas, but I didn't read it then, so we'll read it today. And that's the second book. So an extra 2 books onto my TBR for this month. Let's get into reading them now. So I'm not really going anywhere because I've already read Armor and I wanted to talk about it with you. This book is basically a dual perspective book. The first perspective that you have is this guy named Felix, and he is a scout in a space army, and they are invading this planet that they call Banshee, and in retaliation for an attack on Earth by these creatures that they call ants. And they basically seem to be giant ants, like bigger than a man ants. Now, this planet is not really conductive to human life, so all of the fighters wear suits of armor, right? So it's like a fully encased suit of armor. You get air, you get food, you get water, and then it increases your strength and your agility and stamina and everything. And it protects you, but the ants are kind of like overpowering in sheer numbers. So it's very easy for somebody to kill like 20, 30, 100 ants all by themselves. But when you get wave upon wave upon wave of like 20 guys versus 5,000 to 10,000 to 20,000 ants, eventually the ants overpower the humans. And this guy Felix is either really, really lucky or really, really unlucky because he keeps surviving these battles that he shouldn't survive. And he should have been like retired or taken off drops, but there's a glitch in the computer system. So he keeps being sent out and keeps surviving things that he shouldn't survive. And his story is really about like trauma and battle fatigue and PTSD and how he's dealing with basically everybody around him dying constantly and constantly be sent into these horrible battles, and his mental health basically like ignored by upper brass and medical professionals. And then the other character, I want to say his name is John, but I could be wrong. James, John, something really generic that I didn't remember. His perspective takes place 4 years after Felix's perspective, and he is kind of like a famous outlaw, I guess. The ant war is still going on, but it's in the back of everybody's mind, and he is nowhere near the planet Banshee. He is on a different planet, and working to kind of like con some people, I guess is the best way to say what he's doing. And he comes across Felix's story, and you kind of have his con interspersed with him like seeing what Felix went through in his life and kind of dealing with like the secondhand trauma, and trying to figure out how the hell Felix did what he did through all of his horrible experiences. And so you have those two stories that kind of like overlap and converge and all of that stuff that stories like that do. Because you know at some point, like you got to figure out why these two totally separate seeming stories, like where do they come together to make one book? Overall, I thought that the story was very interesting, and the idea of like the PTSD and dealing with these like very intense battles and like improper personnel management, I guess is how we're gonna put this, from the military. All of that was really interesting, but I ended up giving this book overall 3 stars because there were 2 things that were very problematic in this book. And if you're one of those people who can take a book and read something problematic and be like, oh, that's a product of its time, I'm okay with that, then you might like this book a whole lot more than I did. But I don't let problematic content off because it was a problem of its time or it was normal in its time. Like, we need to see these things and be like, yes, that was normal for its time, but it's really fucked up that that was normal for its time. So what these 2 things were, first off, it was just blatant racism. They used some slurs to describe people of Asian descent. So it wasn't a huge part of the story, but they were very much slurs that would be in absolutely no way appropriate today. The other thing was abuse, like physical abuse. The character John or James or whatever the hell his name is that I can't remember his name, he was, I don't know, he's just kind of an asshole, I guess. And he was in a relationship with this woman, like in a sexual relationship. And at one point he got mad at something unrelated to her or their relationship and took it out on her by like physically beating the shit out of her and then sexually assaulting her. And that's problematic in and of itself, but then the author made it, or compounded how problematic it was by making her say things like, this is what I deserve, like hit me, beat me. And she comes from a background where she had been raped multiple times throughout her life and career by like a stepfather and then superiors and stuff like that. And so the author showing that she thought because she had been sexually assaulted so many times and raped that she was deserving of this physical abuse from another character, and that while something like that can be used as a talking point, this was not used as a talking point. This was like he thought he was in the right for doing this, and it was never pointed out by any of the other characters or even his like subconscious or the author that he was incorrect in doing this at any point, which is why it's problematic. It also is something that didn't really need to be in a sci-fi about space aliens. Like, sexual assault and physical assault is just, it didn't make sense with the story. So didn't particularly like that part, didn't like the racism. Both of those are very, very small portions of the overall story, so it didn't knock it down any further than the 3-star. It probably would have been a 4, 4.5, 5-star if those episodes were not in the book. So problematic, interesting story. I'd like to see somebody remake this, modernize it, make something similar to it. It is very, like, it did remind me a whole hell of a lot like Starship Troopers. Is that the name of it? I think that's the name of it. If I'm not, then I'm, just ignore me. I'll put it over here if that was the wrong name. But it did remind me a whole hell of a lot of that story. And it could have been the inspiration for that story, I don't know. But it focused a whole lot more on the mental health aspects of the story and not just killing bugs. So there you go. It was okay. Anyway, I'm gonna go read Transwizard Harriet Porber and check back in with you when I'm done with that. Hello, so I'm back. I did finish Transwizard Harriet Porber and the Theater of Love, and I want to start out with the title on this one. So this is an adult erotica novel. Now, there are barely any sex scenes in here. This is more of like a mocking, like it's mocking, it's making fun of the author of the books that this sounds like. So the Theater of Love is not like a sex dungeon or whatever you imagine a Theater of Love to be. It's like a magic show that Harriet Porber puts on where it's about loving yourself, loving your neighbor, bringing happiness into the world. But it sounds like a sex show. So, but that's what you get a lot in this book, where it sounds like it should go one stereotypical way of like an erotica novel, but it's really just well-rounded, wholesome, calling people and corporations on their bullshit, and I live for this. So this is the second book in the series. The first one is Transwizard Harriet Porber and the Bad Boy Parasophilus, which I read last month or the month before. What is time? But the story in the first book is a lot better. I like the story better, but the shade in this book, the tea that is spilled, the shade, that's what this book is about. The story in and of itself is kind of mediocre at best, but damn does this book go in at the Just Kidding Recreational Company. It's good. It's good. I very, very much enjoyed the shade in this book. So it's very short, so not a lot to talk about. Just let me tell you, if you can deal with the like sex scenes in like a typical regular romance book, then you're fine to read these. They're sometimes labeled as erotica novels, but they're not. They have like standard sex scenes, I think there's 3 whole sex scenes in this entire book. They're all exactly the same, basically. There's nothing kinky, or I guess there is a little bit, but it's not like super overly descriptive. Like, her bosoms do not heave. It just has sex. I don't know how to explain this. I don't read a lot of romance with like graphic sex scenes, obviously. But yeah, so this is like fairly tame as far as the sex scenes go. It is described on page, but not described with a whole hell of a lot of detail. So, there you go. I highly recommend this, especially if you were very much against TERFs, and you want a good laugh. These are hilarious. I will give them that. These are some of the most hilarious books I have ever read, and I love them. So, highly recommend. But I think that is it for this vlog. I just wanted to read those 2 books. I am super behind this month on reading, so I need to go plow through the rest of this TBR that I've got going on here. Also, my hair looks super fun. We're ignoring that. Anyway, thank you for hanging out with me today, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye!